Hello everyone, my name is BlackWatch and welcome to another episode of How to Play. In this week's episode we're taking a look at Jordan Trace, also known as Thermite. This is an episode that is a long time in the making. He was the first guy I made my real Rainbow Six content on in my How to Fix Thermite video, and he's pushing up on 90 hours played. He is my OG attacker and he is the king of hard breach. So, apologies for that strange intro. Anyway, Thermite is a 2 armor, 2 speed operator on the attacking side. He's a member of the FBI SWAT CTU alongside his attacking compatriot Ash and his defenders Pulse and Castle. He has access to 2 primary weapons, the 5.56 XIAR, which is my recommended primary weapon because it's definitely the more competent out of the 2. And the other one is the M1014 shotgun. Now, it's a semi-automatic shotgun. You should know the deal with semi-auto shotguns, and if you don't, they are overall quite weak, very situational, especially for an attacker. When you're attacking, you gotta have that pump action shotgun, otherwise it's not worth bringing at all. So definitely bring the 5.56 instead. In terms of secondaries, he's got 2 options. He's got the M45, which is essentially an M1911. It deals slightly more damage than the other secondary, which is the FN57, but it also has a lower magazine capacity of only 8 with that 1 in the chamber, versus I think it's like, well, it's significantly more. It's a lot more rounds in the 5.7. So you deal a little bit less damage with the 5.7, but the recoil is better and the capacity is significantly higher. So it's high cap, low recoil versus okay recoil and pretty high damage. So take your pick. I tend to pick the M45 because it looks nicer. I like the 1911 platform. Don't really like the look of the 5.7. But more recently I've been picking the 5.7 purely because since it had the damage buff, that capacity is a big deal. In terms of secondary gadgets, he has access to flashbangs, which are the ones I take with me most of the time, but the other one that is more than suitable is the Claymore. Now the reason why the Claymore is important, that's just a little point about Thermite's best friend Thatcher, is that he can bring a Claymore which allows your teammate who plays as Thatcher to bring breaching charges, because you do not have access to breaching charges anymore, which is a big deal because Thermite was a lot more versatile when he could initiate his own breaches outside of using his primary gadget, which is the Brimstone BC3 Exothermic Breaching Charge. Now, this is essentially one of only 2 gadgets that can hard breach. Hard breaching is the breaching of metallic, reinforced walls, or hatches. Now, the only other operator who can do this is Hibana, and she does that with her X-Kairos pellets launched out of her X-Kairos launcher. They are smaller than the Brimstone charge. She has 3 of them, whereas Thermite only has 2, and they can also be detonated in sync, whereas Thermite has to place 1 charge and then detonate before placing a second charge. The difference is Brimstone has a much bigger breaching radius, so the size of the breaching hole is huge, whereas the size of Hibana's breaching holes are about enough to look through when you're only using 1, enough to vault through when you use 2 if they're placed correctly, or crouch through, and enough to walk through, but no wider and no taller if you're using all 3 charges in the one area. So that's the start of the strengths for Thermite over his other opponent, essentially, because really when it comes to playing Siege, there's very few sites in the game that actually don't require a hard breacher to take out a wall. You can attack almost any site without one, it's just significantly easier to do it with one, and it's almost always a certainty that you'll have one of these guys on your team. So versus Hibana, his breaches are much bigger. They're much more intense, they deal more damage if someone's behind them. You'll see me get a kill with the breaching charge at some point against a Frost who decided to hop onto the old DP28 LMG that Tachanka left behind. And they just leave you with a much larger hole that's much easier to work with when you actually want to push into the objective, because you have the opportunity to go left or right, and even though it's a little bit of variance, it's still enough to make it a little bit harder for the enemy to pin down your position when you're moving in, because those little inches make a difference. It also has a much shorter fuse, so when you're going up against Bandit, setting off a Thermite charge, he needs to be bang on in sync with you placing down or sorry, detonating the charge for him to actually be able to destroy it with his batteries. So when you're playing as Hibana, on the other hand, her fuse is so long that you could have detonated it and it could have run for about a second, and Bandit can still put a battery down on whichever wall you're trying to breach and destroy all of the Kairos pellets you place down. And the other strength is that he is very important for the team. He's obviously one of the only two options you have for breaching hard walls, and that makes him nigh on essential. Either him or Hibana need to be picked. But in terms of his weaknesses, his kit, weapon-wise, is fairly average. His shotgun is one of the weakest shotguns in the game. It's not got a lot of range, it doesn't have a lot of damage, it is a shell of its former self. And his assault rifle, while perfectly competent, is just nothing spectacular. It's got okay damage, it's got a fairly middle of the road rate of fire, it's not that high. The reload speed is actually quite slow, and the ADS time is one of the slowest of all of the assault rifles. And yeah, it's very okay. The recoil is pretty solid. I'd say that's the biggest and most positive thing about his rifle, is that it has very controllable recoil. But other than that, fairly unspectacular. It does the job, but just not as good as that Type 28 that Hibana brings in the primary slot. It's a very, very strong, high rate of fire, high damage assault rifle, which despite the low capacity is still fantastic as a primary weapon. And then of course she's got the secondary, that SMG that she can whip out at any time, and it's very, very strong. So keep that in mind when you're playing as Thermite. You really want to be deciding which site is better for him. So when you're wanting to approach a site, generally speaking, when you're playing in ranked, you're going to know, or have a rough idea at least, of where the enemy are going to be. If it's a very hatch heavy site, you want to favour Hibana, because she can take out 3 hatches, whereas Thermite can only take out 2, and she can do it simultaneously. She just has that extra bit of versatility, which is another one of Thermite's weaknesses. His gadget has one real strength, which is big walls like garages on, say, Consulate or on Chalet. That is his playground, because he can smash open a big hole and problem solved, whereas Hibana is better where you want versatile things. Maybe there's a hatch on the site and you want to take out the hatch and also make a hole in the wall, maybe make a hole in the other wall, just give sight lines, all sorts of stuff you can do with Hibana that you just can't do with Thermite, unfortunately. But again, he has very strong, very heavy breach holes, which are pretty good. So it's a trade-off between the two of them. And he's a bit more difficult to pick up than your general operator. That's another one of his weaknesses. Because of the way that you have to play Thermite, you really need to know the maps, you need to know different ways that you want to be attacking different sites, and that's obviously a bit of a barrier to entry, because you've got to have that knowledge in advance of playing them. But anyway, we'll get on to what you want to do when you're being Thermite, when you're playing them for the first time. So your number one priority, other than doing your job, is staying alive. Now, too many people forget about this when they're playing as Thermite. They're too quick to run out of spawn, first person there, and bang, Thermite's dead. That is a huge, huge problem when you're playing as an attacker, when you discover that your only hard breacher has been killed by a spawn peeker at the start of the game. If you're Thermite, you're going to wait and you're going to make sure that the enemy takes out your teammate, or you manage to get a kill on them through your teammate, because you don't want to be the first person in the line of fire. Because if you die, you're incredibly important. This also goes for Thatcher, but less so, because you can survive without the Thatcher, but you cannot breach the wall without the Thermite. You gotta stay alive. Ask the less important operators who don't have as crucial a role as you do to go first and back you up, and wait for those teammates to feed or shut down the peekers at the start of the round. Do your job, open the wall, then you can feel free to die. It's totally up to yourself. You don't have to continue playing the round. You can walk in, get yourself killed, but do not do that until you've done your job, because you're just letting your team down. When it comes to breaching, you really need to learn the common pressure points for each site. So a big example would be on Chalet when you're attacking the bar. The best place to push is probably Games Room. The issue with Games Room is that you also have a hatch which can be pressured by the enemy team, so you need to shut down that hatch in Library. Once you've claimed Library, you then need to take control of the stairs going into the hallway between Games Room and bar. Once you shut this down, or give yourself some smoke for cover, or flashbangs for cover, then you can feel free to plant your charge on the wall. What I wouldn't recommend is trying to take on the forward push from the outside of the bar, going into fireplace, because if you try and take this on, you have an overhead, you have the kitchen, or sorry, the dining room, you also have the basement. There's a lot of different places you can get hit from, whereas in the other one, there's only 2 places. So pick the safer option, and pick the option that's going to give you a stronger push. Learn the weaknesses of those sites from your point of view as well, and those things I talked about, the likes of hatches and overlooks and just different exposed points, are the things you need to know, because you need to know where fire is going to come from, and those points that you need to address and give yourself help with. So cover yourself, get your teammates to cover you, and make sure that you don't get taken out by silly things like this. Be quick when you're planting your charges and setting them off, but don't be risky. Go for safe stuff. Don't go for something that's going to get you killed, because ultimately if your charge doesn't go off, you've done nothing to benefit your team. In terms of dealing with Bandit, this is one that really comes with practice and experience more than anything else, but you want to try and bait his charges out. So first of all, ensure that you have your gadget settings to advanced and toggle. So you want to be able to deploy your gadget. What normally happens is you press the deploy button, and once you let go of that, it will deploy the charge, and there's no way to cancel it. Toggle is you press the gadget button and it brings up your gadget, and then you have to press a separate button to start placing it. And if you let go of that placement button, it will then stop deploying the charge. So you can do this where you start planting the charge. If you're taking damage from a bandit, you can let go, it saves you some health, and it saves you from losing your charge. So you want to bait those charges by placing them down. It's a very distinctive sound when Brimstone gets placed, and the bandit will try and put his charge down to counter that. So you basically want to play a little juggling game in the same way that he will be, to try and fool him into placing it on the wrong wall, and then you want to just start and stop, and then eventually you want to settle and launch it. Don't hesitate. Once it's on the wall and you're going to go for it, you need to detonate it immediately, because you might just catch him off guard. Also, do this in conjunction with your Thatcher. Communicate with him, give him an idea of where he's placing the charges, and then try and detonate it at the right time, so that you can then place your charge and get it off without it being destroyed by a shock wire. A lot of this is just practice, a lot of it is also luck, and it depends on how good the bandit is that's on the other side, but vary between whichever walls you're doing. So if it's a 2-wall setup, don't go in the middle, join between 2 walls, because a bandit charge on either wall will destroy that charge. Instead, choose the left one or the right one, and then switch between them and try and fool him. Maybe plant it on the right side once, then the left side, then the right side again, and then do it on the right side one more time, and maybe you'll catch him off guard that time because he expects you to go left. It's all about mind games. In terms of just sort of little general tips is Thermite, just the little things you pick up and things you should try and do and try and avoid as well. Avoid doing hatches if you have a Hibana with you. If you have a Hibana kicking around, let her do the hatches. That is basically her bread and butter, is taking out those hatches. So prioritize her for that particular role. Set yourself up to do walls instead, and it takes a little bit of the slack, or a little bit of the pressure off of you, gives you a little bit more slack, because you're not the only one who can do the hard breaching job when you have a Hibana there. Obviously it's not ideal to be doubling down on a single role, but with Hibana having such a good kit, it's not that bad an idea, so you might want to take the 2 of them together, but it's totally up to yourself. And when you're using your charges, try your very best not to use them on anything that isn't metallic, because if you do them on other surfaces, it's just a total waste. Only do this as an absolute last resort if you have no other option, because they'll just get destroyed because they take that time to detonate. You can see the trail of Thermite going through the wall as they detonate, and then they'll just get shot by the enemy team. Anyway guys, thanks for watching this video, hope you enjoyed it. I will catch you in the next one. Do svidania. Bye bye.